Hi, everybody, and welcome back to Ask the Unfaithful. I'm joined by my beautiful, intelligent, powerful co-host, James Anir. My name is Sam. Thank you for joining us today. Today, we are jumping into a question that is extremely helpful for you, the betrayed, but also a fantastic litmus test for you, the unfaithful. Today's question is, what are the 5 signs of emotional immaturity in the unfaithful? Before we go out, we launch out into the 5 signs, James, what is a definition of emotional immaturity?
So we'll just start off with the official one, which is American Psychological Association, otherwise known as the APA. And theirs is that, well, I'll start with emotional maturity is a high and appropriate level of emotional control and expression. But on the other end of the spectrum, the emotional immaturity is the tendency to express or bury, which is worse, emotions without restraint or that are excessive for the situation, meaning they could be out of control or inappropriate, say, amplified for the situation. Think about like you would if you were thinking about a child or a teenager reacting versus an adult response.
So, when we're dealing with emotional immaturity, I hate to state the obvious because every betrayed male or female is sitting back going, well, yeah, we know it's a problem, but from a clinical perspective, why is emotional immaturity such a problem when you're trying to heal from infidelity or addiction?
Well, because it's an emotional reactivity, it really can destroy trust, respect, and connection. And when you think about that, that it would do that in a relationship where there hasn't been an infidelity, it is in itself a kind of betrayal because when two adults enter into a partnership or a coupleship, they're expecting the other to be adult like. Now, we all have our moments for sure. In terms of that being sort of its own betrayal, that certainly can happen. We're talking about here when there's infidelity involved, there's already this destruction of the trust and the respect and the connection. So then if you add the emotional reactivity to that, that at least amplifies it, if not, what's the word I'm looking
Sabotages
for?
it.
Sabotages, yes. If not sabotage it, it really is sort of a synergistic type
Yeah.
of effect.
Because if you're going to heal from infidelity or addiction, you're going to have to, at the very least, be willing to develop emotional maturity because it was probably emotional immaturity that allowed for the infidelity or addiction in the first place. So
Right.
you're going to have to at least be willing to develop emotional maturity because if you're not willing, would you agree with this? That if you're not willing to really grow up emotionally, there's very little chance the relationship can be salvaged.
Absolutely, I agree. And then part of the problem with that is, we get to this stage in life and we haven't managed it so far. But this is, we're in a position now where we really have to.
Yeah.
And so we're going to talk about aspects of that later on in this and how to do it and what that will look like when we start reaching those metrics, as you like to call them.
Okay, I'm going to read the 5 signs of emotional immaturity, and then I'm going to let you run with the how does it show up? How does it manifest? Number one, difficulty or inability to handle conflict or emotions. Number two, not being accountable or taking responsibility. Number three, self-centeredness. Number four, difficulty connecting and communicating. Number five, emotionally unavailable, which also includes a lack of empathy.
If we take those one by one, so let's go with the first one that you talked about, difficulty or inability to handle conflict and emotions. So that's going to show up often as avoidance. So when, difficult conversations are put off or faithful procrastinates talking about them, and that can come from many things, fear of what's this going to look like, fear of not being able to handle it and so on, or handle the emotions involved. It can also look like absolutely leaving the room. It can look like not being present in the moment, off in your head. somewhere. It can look a lot like workaholism or just working too much, ignoring the betrayed, or escaping into tech like iPads or iPhones or computers or whatever. Uh,
Gaming for hours at a time.
yes, that's a really big one, actually. Probably need to do a podcast on the tech and how that disrupts our ability to be present and our ability to really grow and work on this very difficult work of post betrayal. Another one would be in this difficulty or inability to handle conflict would be changing the topic, shifting the focus, deflection. That kind of also lends itself into the humor part. We can use humor to deflect. The problem with that, of course, is, and we'll talk about it later in the empathy piece, that it can really dismiss or belittle what our partners are feeling, difficulty regulating emotions. So ooh, that's a big one, right? We're not going to try to tackle that whole thing, but difficulty regulating emotions. So big emotions that come up. One of the ones that comes up a lot is anger and hostility, and those can be two. Hostility is more of an action out of resentment or anger, but it can look like throwing a temper tantrum. So if it looks like a 3-year-old, that means that
Hmm.
3-year-old in the person is kind of activated, right? So throwing a temper tantrum, leaving in a huff, which is more like looking at a teenager, going
Yeah.
on the attack, name calling, bullying, being manipulative or controlling. Those are all results of having difficulty regulating emotions. Then another one, and I know this section's a little bit on the long side, but it's really important, lying. People always say,
Right.
well, why does he lie or why does she lie all the time? And honestly, it's to get out of the discomfort of difficult conversations or hard situations. That's what it is. Lying is a defense mechanism. It's protective. It doesn't mean it's right. Just
Right.
because it's protective doesn't mean it's right. It just is a result of not being able to handle or emotionally regulate. Using other harmful defense mechanisms like isolating, withdrawing emotions and connection, to withdrawing love, spoiling things for other people. That's a big one. Like we see that a lot. So Thanksgiving, you're all sitting down to dinner and one person is like, I don't want to be here, rawr, and then kind of wrecks it for everybody else. And that's a very harmful defense mechanism. That's again not being able to regulate emotionally. And lastly in this section, can not being able to handle criticism.
And that could be even just feedback that we say is unfaithful. Oh, you're being critical, when in fact, we're actually just offering some feedback on how something may have sounded or how something may have come across. But we unfaithful are notorious for having hairpin triggers of reactivity, which is what we're talking about today, right?
Yeah, I mean, we hate admitting that we're sensitive, right? But the fact is, if we're reactive like that, we are sensitive. And what does that mean? It means that it hits our wounds in
Yeah.
some way that says, oh, when that's hit, that means this. We've associated that at some point in our lives, usually young, that a certain action and whatever the response or reaction is always going to be the same. And thus, if somebody then offers constructive criticism, for instance, we take it in a very negative vein and take it as, oh, I'm not good enough or I'm wrong or something along those lines, because that's what it was when we were kids.
Right. The next one is not being accountable or taking responsibility, which is an enormously even just activating sentence because so many betrayed would say, if they would just take some responsibility, we might be able to get somewhere. So, what does that look like?
So I think the first thing you're going to see is
Yeah.
blaming for anything that goes wrong, or we'll talk about Darvo at some point in another podcast, but reversing it back onto or flipping it back on to your partner, rather than saying, okay, that I own some of that or all of it. So that brings me to the second part, denying our part in whatever the conflict or issue is, not taking ownership. And here's a big one, not accepting the consequences for our actions. The consequences for negative actions are probably going to be negative, right? And they're not
Yeah.
comfortable and they're not going to be something that we like. And so we're going to try to push those away and not take them on because of that uncomfortable piece to it or downright shaming piece of it, although it's self-shaming at that point.
Number three is really a bit of a unique one because number three is kind of like an overarching description of the heart of the unfaithful in general, if I can be so bold as to say that, and that is selfishness.
Mhm.
So, what does selfishness look like? And some of the betrayeds are probably like, Sam, I don't think we need to know what selfishness looks like. We've seen it, we're living with it. But from a clinical perspective,
Yeah.
maybe you can outline some of that for them.
So possibly a better word for it is self-centeredness. And there's a reason
Yeah,
why we say that from a clinical standpoint anyway. You're looking at self-centered really means the focus is on me. Selfish has that very heavy connotation of judgment. That said, I'm not against it because we need to be called on our stuff, right? We need to be pulled up, so to speak. What it really comes down to is when we put our wants and needs ahead of our partners in this case, our actions and our decisions kind of seem to show that we don't care about how our partner feels or their health, their mental health, their emotional health, and so on. And so, an example of that might be putting my free time and interests ahead of my partner's or ahead of shared activities, making choices without consulting our partner. Heavy one. And, a lot of those choices can also mean financial choices. Here's one that we talked about in another podcast, and it's the constant, and I mean constant, demands for attention and validation. Now, some people are going to go, but I don't, I'm not asking for praise all the time. I don't even like to get praised. No, no, no. Well, we talked about four personality styles, if you will, or four styles of getting attention. And one of them would be the turtle, which is I don't want any attention. Get away from me. No, no. But what you're really doing is inviting that in, or
right.
you're hiding, but you're inviting that. You're wanting somebody to find you and say, hey, is everything okay? So that actually is that the clinging vine, which was being needy, which is most people would look at this as, oh, I'm not needy. Okay, so maybe you're not that clinging vine. Maybe you're the turtle. Maybe you're the star. Hey, baby, I'm a star. Really having to shine and be perfect. The or the Nero, Emperor Nero, the angry one, teenager rebel, all those three go together. So those are ways that we get attention and validation from the people that around us. And hopefully, obviously, we want that from our partner, which unfortunately puts such a demand on their energy levels because they're constantly having to do it for us instead of us finding that inside. We have difficulty postponing gratification. I want what I want and I want it now. That's that inability to, if you have boxes of Amazon piling up in the hallway, which I've hidden mine, here's a big one: lack of compassion or deeply felt concern for others. We're going to get to this because this is one that isn't talked about a lot. That deeply felt part is very important. That's an assessment that we as unfaithfuls can make for ourselves. Do I deeply feel concerned for other people when things are going badly for them? Now, that can be broadly, do I feel that? Our partner's resentment can get in the way of that. And
Right.
then lastly, always talking about yourself or always making it about you. I know it's all about me. Everybody says that, but we do that really, really well. Like we can be just talking and suddenly, oh, I know how that feels. And then blah, 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 blah. We're talking all about our own experience instead of listening and being compassionate about the other person's experience.
What I love about today is we're not talking about shaming the unfaithful. We're not talking about coming down on the unfaithful. And I do get a lot of feedback from people who are very straight to the point and say, I love that you guys call out the unfaithful, but you're not shaming them. You're not trying to demean or degrade them. Why would we ever do that? We are former unfaithfuls. But
Mhm.
we do have to call it like we see them and call it like we see it, rather, which is we're talking about emotional immaturity.
Yeah.
And would you agree that our recovery as unfaithful hinges on being willing to grow up, become mature in these areas, and not do it overnight, but at least do the work to mature? Is that fair to say?
It is fair. Without it, we're not going to be two adults in a relationship.
It's exactly right. And as long as I stay in a childhood mindset, I'm repeating all of these signs of emotional immaturity. Number four is difficulty connecting deeply, which again displays that emotional immaturity, right?
Yeah, it starts with that emotional unavailability. There are probably some unfaithfuls out there rolling their eyes right now because this gets talked about an awful lot. And it is talked about an awful lot for a really, really good reason. And I'm going to describe kind of how that can come off to other people. And it might be a little bit shocking for an unfaithful to hear this, but it can seem really cold and disinterested. If you imagine that your partner's feeling like you're that way, or other people are feeling like you're that way, it probably goes pretty strongly against your self-concept of, I'm not that way. What I'm telling you is that it is landing that way, and that isn't what
Right.
you want. The more you're actually acting within your integrity from the person that you want to be, that warm and interested person, the more that that is going to come across that way. So why do we do that? Why do we seem cold and disinterested? We're actually, because we don't know what to do with the emotions that are around us, and we don't know how to handle them, and they can be downright scary. So,
Absolutely.
we take that step back, and what does that look like? It looks exactly like that. If we're emotionally unavailable, we also don't talk about our feelings. So that vulnerability word, the V word, why don't we talk about them? Well, because again, we don't know what to do with them. Also, we have this idea that, oh, if I have this feeling, I better have an answer for it. But feelings are feelings. We don't have to have a logical, or we don't have to have it walked all the way through and figure that out. Our partners certainly just want to know what we're feeling. Now,
Right.
there's a cautionary bit there. Without the emotional regulation part, that doesn't mean just going,
Yeah.
and then that distance and aloofness. Aloof is a bit different than distance. So the distance of this, aloof is kind of more like that.
Yeah. And I think the betrayed has every right to take an approach that says, look, do you want this relationship or not? Your aloofness leads me to believe your refusal to do therapy or coaching or read a book or do anything leads me to believe that you don't want this relationship. And in fairness, maybe they do want the relationship, but
Yeah.
they're emotionally immature and have some real blind spots. Would you agree with that?
Yes. There, it's going to be hard for betrayeds to believe this, but
Right.
the bulk, the majority of unfaithfuls actually do want the relationship. They do want to repair things. They just are so um, ignorant, and I don't mean that, and you're so ignorant, but they're ignorant of what it takes to do it. And it is scary for them because they just don't know how. Even coming down to communication, just basic communication, difficulty communicating is a big one under this connection piece. Unfaithfuls, you might have really black and white perspective. It's either this or it's this. That's not the case. Obviously, I don't even think I need to really explain that most things in life are gray. But when we try to just find that black and white, it's because we want it to be A or B, because this
Yeah.
mess in the middle, or I should say A or Z, because the mess in the middle, right? It's like, wow. Another thing is difficulty putting our feelings into words. I'm going to do a short on that. I did a short on feeling your feelings all the way through, but what about just identifying what I'm feeling?
Right.
That's even the basic ones that can be really hard. I had to learn that. Nobody taught us that for the most part when we were maybe happy and mad. but not a bunch of the others. One of the things that we can do is create a minefield around us. It's kind of protective. It's a defense. But that minefield is the betrayed doesn't know if they're going to step on a mine that's going to make us blow up, that's going to make us run away, that's going to make us joyful,
Right.
that's going to make us come at them, because there's no way to really anticipate that because of the avoidance, and they just can't tell. Then they're ending up having to sort of set themselves up so that they're like creating this map of that minefield and going, okay, well, I better do this. If he walks in the door or she walks in the door and has that body language, I better be doing A, B, or C. So that's the minefield. That's constant vigilance. And one of the big problems for betrayeds is they immediately become hypervigilant because they don't know what they can trust in the world. And so
Right.
we have to do our best not to add to that, to help take some of that away. And we talked about this bit for unfaithfuls who they're not really able to identify their feelings, they're afraid of them. That also results in holding kind of the rest of the world and other people at a higher level of suspiciousness. Now, I'm not talking about not being friendly. I'm talking about, okay, I can be friendly, but what do you really want?
Yeah.
What's your motivation here? I don't trust that. To a partner, this whole piece, difficulty connecting deeply, feels like I can't quite grab on to him or her. And if it can also feel like a come, and then a boom, a push away, right?
Yeah.
I've also got another podcast planned on the push pull.
Well, it feels like a moving target. So when we can identify these signs of emotional immaturity and then we can lay out a game plan, don't you think we remove the moving target aspect to
Mhm.
at least a certain extent, right? It's almost impossible to
Yeah.
get rid of early on, but at least we can contain it, don't you think?
I think even in really healthy relationships, there can be a bit of a moving target. So yes, it's about diminishing that issue of, or making it smaller of,
Yeah,
wow,
right.
where is it? So yes, I agree completely on that.
You said it beautifully earlier, is that oftentimes the unfaithful wants the relationship, but they don't know what they're doing. So
Right.
that can appear like they're moving the target when in reality it's kind of emotional ineptitude. And I hate to use that word, but it
Well,
seems like a pretty good fitting
yeah.
word. I was emotionally inept, and I can still be emotionally inept at times if I'm hungry, angry, lonely, tired, or bored, right?
Or ashamed. Yeah.
Yes,
Um,
absolutely.
I still am trying to fit the B into the halt or shout. Can't quite do it. So if somebody has an idea as to how we can do an acronym with the B in there. So
Yeah, it's really hard to just be famous. And so we'll find something that may take us around the world, right? If we can come up with it, it'll take us around the world. We'll go on tour with it.
yeah.
The fifth sign of emotional immaturity is a lack of empathy. But what does that look like? That's what we're talking about. This could be a good litmus test. If you're an unfaithful and you're like, I'm empathetic, well, listen to my good buddy James lay out some illustrations of lack of empathy.
Right. So there are 10 points I'm going to make here. That does not mean they're inclusive. So the first one is not small. Not considering the impact of your actions on your partner. The second, dismissing your partner's emotions. Third, empty words of comfort. Like, oh, it'll be okay. It's not
Right.
that big a deal. We've gotten through, or you've gotten through this kind of thing before. Or, those are not helpful. Offering solutions instead of an ear, making jokes about your betrayed's emotional pain in order to deflect. So that sounds horrible. Who's going to do that? When we're using humor and when we're joking around, when our betrayeds are trying to tell us something really heavy emotionally, that's exactly what we're doing. We're making it into a joke. And that even though it's our defense, it's not like we're necessarily conscious of what we're doing there. I'm making it conscious now because
Right.
it's huge. It is so devastating. It's like a massive blow for a betrayed to spill their heart out and have that taken and turned into a joke because we can't manage it emotionally. Always bringing it back to me,
Yeah.
how whatever they're going through affects me, what my similar experience might have been. Oh, I remember when, or moving from the betrayed's feelings to my own feelings, which completely shuts off, cuts off what our betrayeds are trying to say. This one sounds kind of similar, but insensitivity. Like, no, duh, a lack of empathy, there's insensitivity. I know. And I put it in there for a reason because people might not really get it in a detailed way. So difficulty understanding and relating to other people's feelings, problems, or life situations.
For our corporate friends out there, you could say, read the room, right?
Yes, yes, absolutely. Read the room. Being quick to judge. Well, that's happening because you did this, or you're doing that, or you're
Yeah.
this, or you're that. That judgment. Talk about lowering the boom.
Yeah.
Lack of forgiveness. So holding grudges, unwilling to forgive other people for mistakes, meaning, oh, your partner's going to make mistakes. You think your partner's not going to be in a spiraled out state, that he or she is not going to be angry or rageful or say things that are hurtful? Of course, you have to again read the room. You've got to consider why that is. And you have to be able to forgive that a sort of expansion or lability or movement of emotions. The 10th one is basically having a lack of interest in others, difficulty listening to other people. Partners, okay. I get that it's difficult because it's big emotional stuff, but a litmus test here is, what about other people? Do I have difficulty listening to them? Whatever they're sharing, happy
Yeah.
or otherwise. And another piece of that is difficulty being happy for them or sharing in their happiness and their triumphs, reveling with them in that, being happy that they've succeeded without sitting there going, well, I didn't get the prize, or that's
Mhm.
that type of thing.
It makes great sense. That's why I think recovery groups are so important, to have people around you who can celebrate with you on little victories, but yet
Mhm.
be compassionate when we screw up. I know that you do this in intensives. You do this in introductions and interviews if people want to attend your intensives. I do this in my consultations or in my practices. There's kind of this point where you say to an unfaithful male or female, where you go, I think it's understandable that he or she is having trouble regulate their emotions due to the magnitude of the choices that you've made. Would you consider the possibility that maybe your betrayed partner has PTSD or complex PTSD, right? And at that point, I think you and I both would agree that how an unfaithful responds to that statement sets the tone. Are they a candidate for recovery, or are they going to just say, well, because they can't handle it, right? Because that's
Yeah.
too much truth for them.
One of the ways that that's indicated very quickly is yeah, I understand that, but everything that comes before a but, right,
Yeah,
is
it,
nope, doesn't mean anything.
absolutely. It is an enormous red flag. And so, as we kind of talk more about emotional immaturity, we've laid out what the five are. We've talked about what they look like. Now, what can you do about emotional immaturity?
I'm just going to throw out a definition of emotional maturity first, even though I covered a little bit at the beginning. Really, it's the ability to regulate our emotions and behaviors in healthy ways that's going to result in healthy, deeply connective relationship with our partner where they feel like they can talk about their feelings, their thoughts, their worries without being judged, misunderstood, attacked, ridiculed, dismissed, disrespected.
That's just excellent. I just love that. I love all of that so much.
It's also about self-awareness and awareness of others, especially our betrayed. So our ability, we have to learn this, right? Our ability
Yeah.
to recognize our partner's emotional state, then empathetically connect with their experiences and make it all about the we, which may take actually doing that pendulum, going all the way over to all about them, and then bringing it back into the middle, which is all about we. Remember, this is relational recovery. So that all about the we really is what we're aiming for.
And you said it wonderfully. I wrote it down just in my notes because I want to memorize it. But you said a deeply connective relationship. Find me a better way of saying what each partner at the depth, at the core of our being probably wants is a deeply connective relationship. Because that implies passion, closeness, vulnerability, eroticism, oneness. I mean, you can go on and on and on. But if you want a deeply connective relationship, unfaithful, if that's what you want, I don't know of any unfaithful who's genuinely trying to save their relationship that wouldn't be like, Sam, absolutely. I want a deeply connective relationship. Tell me how to get it. So, as we head into this part of the podcast, James, what are some signs of actual emotional maturity that the unfaithful can pursue?
Taking responsibility for our actions and accepting the consequences of our past behaviors. Being accountable for present actions. So anything that we're doing currently, being accountable for that. Owning and taking responsibility for those past actions and accepting the consequences is kind of part of that accountability in present, because it's more of an accountability of the past that can help keep us honest in the present. Prioritizing the relationship and our personal growth. It doesn't mean my golf game is improving, my handicap is getting better. It means I'm doing my inner work
Yeah,
diligently and I'm working hard at it. And when I'm getting scared of it, I'm going to face that and move towards it, not away from it, which
without
takes,
having to be babysat
yeah.
or chased into doing it, right?
Yeah, that doesn't mean you can't have a therapist or a coach who's helping you, guiding you and rah-rahing along the way. It just means that you've got to do the work. You have to put the one foot in front of the other. Communicating openly and honestly and with transparency. So that also includes recognizing and avoiding manipulation and defensiveness. Be cautious about, okay, that's manipulation, that's defensive. Be cautious about just going very robotic and neutral,
Hmm.
because it's not about that. It's about really engaging with that openness. I'm not saying that's easy because there's a lot of fear surrounding that and anxiety surrounding that. There's a title to a book. I'm not saying it was a good book. I don't even remember. The title was Feel the Fear and Do It Anyway, which is
Yeah.
what a great title. I don't remember the book because it was when I was like a teenager and I probably didn't read it because I'm ADD. When somebody who's emotionally mature emphasizes collaboration, they're going to actively seek to resolve conflict, right? Be Instead of avoiding them, they're going to actively seek to resolve them and not jump to a, hey, let's ignore the process and get to a solution here. Because part of that resolution is the process of it, of being heard, of listening, of also expressing. Working on being flexible and open-minded helps a lot with that. Working on managing and regulating emotions through self-awareness. Part of that is, okay, what are my emotions? Maybe what am I, or hopefully, where am I feeling those in my body? Because that's going to tell you much quicker than this brain will. And what that's going to do when you work it that way through self-awareness is it'll result in emotional stability, which is what you want
Which
and
everybody wants.
what everybody deserves in that we relationship. Recognizing and sharing your feelings. Again, I'm going to throw out a warning here, not getting victimy, but this and this and this. You don't want to go there. Recognizing and sharing your feelings is also taking an honest appraisal of them and saying, I'm feeling really sad right now. You don't have to know why.
Yeah.
Working on closeness, especially when you're wanting to avoid and distance. That's a key. I don't, I want to run.
Yeah.
That's exactly when you need to go in the direction of. This is a one that's seems odd. Recognize that two truths can exist at the same time. That gets back to that black and white. If it's black and white, you have one truth and one non-truth. If it's gray, you can have two truths going on. They do not have to be in opposition. That's a really big sign of emotional maturity. When we look for internal self-validation, it means that we're relying less on our partner for that, which is going to mean they're less exhausted emotionally.
Right.
And that's going to be really, really helpful in terms of building the relationship and creating more trust. When our partner is triggered, we have to respond with compassion, patience, and love. And that's emotional maturity. When we're
Yeah.
responding or reacting in another way, that's emotionally immature.
And if you make a mistake, emotional maturity is repairing and apologizing and owning it, right?
Yes, absolutely. Because what happens if we don't? Our partner feels the same thing over again. That, wow, I'm standing over here and he or she is standing over there, and we're not together at all on this,
No.
which includes being highly supportive. An emotionally mature person is highly supportive of other people. Why? Because they are reaching deep and connecting with that person on the emotional basis, what they're feeling, what they're going through, and being able to feel that care and concern and compassion deeply. And that supportiveness comes out of that, showing care and understanding of how other people feel. And here's the one that I touched on before: rejoicing in their happiness and their accomplishments.
Yeah.
This isn't all about, I've got to join them in their sadness and get that, or their anger and get that. But wow, they feel really good after that group. Wow, awesome. They finished that certification or whatever, but having that rejoicing in that, really feeling their joy. And lastly in this list is accepting being vulnerable and emotionally close. By accepting, I mean really wanting it. That is a part of emotional maturity, is when we really want it and when another person is being that way, that we receive it, which of course leads to a deeper, more connective relationship. So there's a one key, I brought it up before, that is really, really helpful in growing ourselves up into an emotionally mature person. That's just watch for our strong reactions. This is part of the solution. Where I react strongly is where I need to do the root cause work. So root cause analysis, I got to go to why is that happening? And then how am I going to repair that in myself? That could be inner child work. It could be behavioral work. There's a lot of ways. I related before the scale, 0 to 4 is like whatever is currently happening reaction wise. The 4 to 10 is when there's something historical attached to it. So those 4 to 10 reactions are where we need to go, oh, I got to look at that. So that's really helpful in helping mature ourselves.
It absolutely makes sense. I was writing some notes down and I remembered a word that you had put into a method of communication that we talked about and did a podcast on. And I wanted to add a caveat. You said a deeply connective relationship. I would add, who doesn't want a deeply connective and collaborative relationship?
Yeah.
And that's a little added caveat to today is what can be actually beautiful is when a pursuit of recovery is collaborative. I think in all of this, having a deeply connective relationship is something that we can all accomplish. So if people want more help, let's say that, I'm the biggest cheerleader of y'all's intensives. if someone wants to consider coming to an intensive, either as a couple or, and what a lot of people forget is that you guys do individual intensives. How can they find out more? You actually do something that's really cool, is you and Sharon will actually do an evaluation with them on whether or not they fit what you're trying to do, right?
It's really important if somebody's going to come and see us, that we're a good fit for them. And also, they're a good fit for what we do as well, because otherwise we can say, you know what, this person might be a better fit, or this
Right.
approach might be a better fit. And it's really important that they really can feel like they could connect with us. The way that they get in touch with us is to email info at hopeforus.com. And that's the
Beautiful.
best way.
That's great. We're so grateful for you turning in and listening. As you know, many of you have found us on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. We are thrilled that you continue to tune in week after week. We're honored to do what we do. If we can help you, if we can point you in the right direction, if we can just offer some simple encouragement, you can reach us at asktheunfaithful@gmail.com. We will see you next time. And as always, keep going. Don't give up on yourself. We don't know what's going to happen with your relationship, but we do know this is not the time to give up on yourself. We'll see you next time on Ask the Unfaithful.